Q&A session on the housing action plan that we'll be debating tomorrow. Okay, so do we have any questions for officers? Well, it depends on what your question's about. So we'll start with you, Councillor Panna.
Probably sort of leave.
Oh, good.
I've got a great answers and just kind of direct to whoever the question relates to.
Okay. Wait, just make sure you use that mic. And this is public. This is being live streamed on YouTube. Yeah.
So thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the advice that you've already given. And sorry there's such a long list. Look, I know our good colleague, Councillor O'Neill, has been trying to get a homelessness strategy done. My question really is around capacity and how many more resources you need to get that done, because I think a majority of us feel that's important.
I think that would be David Space, if you'd like to take that question.
Hello. A homelessness strategy is a good idea, I think. So there's no opposition to the development of a strategy. I think where there is reluctance from my perspective is around capacity to complete the work, as well as the number of initiatives that are coming online in the next kind of 12 months. Things like Te Pāmaru, Whakamaru, and the place-based approach to emergency and transitional housing from HUD, and the importance of understanding and assessing the impact that those initiatives have to inform what that strategy should look like coming forward. So
that it's really more a policy piece of work. So maybe that's a question for Baz or Jeff about, like, is there someone in the policy team who could do that? I appreciate you'd need to provide some input though.
Short answer from Jeff is probably no at the moment, but I'll get Jeff to come and chat.
Or do you need more money? Like I think there's a commitment to making it happen, so we're just really interested in how.
Obviously, we've got a very long list of policy projects, so it just becomes a matter of priority of where you allocate resource. Obviously, more resource is always good. If we had the ability to contract in someone to do the job, that would then obviously you can dedicate some resource to help to work alongside our business units and actually try and make that happen. But it's one of those things. If we do that, then something else goes off the agenda.
That's helpful. Thank you, Liam. The next question I've got, hi, welcome, by the way, just around the work that Siobhan started on earthquake-prone buildings, as you know, the deadline is racing towards us. So is it all right if we just have an update about where that work's got to, because committee hasn't had that yet?
Through you, Madam Chair. I think, there's a couple of things that have happened. We've had a move within the departments. We've had the earthquake-prone building team come over to the planning and environment unit to get a closer alignment with some of the monitoring and enforcement side of the business, but also to connect in with the housing development and city development side of the business, where we're trying to build an advocacy campaign that is a bit more thorough and that we can go a lot deeper into the people who are impacted by the earthquake-prone building legislation. Hayley is on secondment to Paul's team, but it is from that unit. So is there anything else you'd like to add, Hayley? Not really. I think that's pretty much about it. I think the plan is by December this year, the report back comes to council.
Okay. So it is planned, so it's going to happen anyway. I guess.
And of course we're making progress with owners, slow progress, but that's still slowly chipping away at the several hundred we have to follow up on. But we're looking forward to reporting to council in December. Okay.
Well, I can just change that to December. I guess just my interest was in making sure it's also seen as a housing issue. It's not.
Oh, look, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
The most pronounced problems are in the housing space, yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's great. And then just the last question for now, because I'm sure people have questions too. Look, I guess councillors have been talking about an advocacy program that the Mayor will lead. So really, the amendments I've got in here around the building code and increasing supply, your initiative about getting some money from government, is it really, we were just going to lead on it? We didn't need there to be an inquiry or a select committee or a piece of legislation? Is that something you're comfortable with providing some advice, or at least collecting some advice from experts in different parts of the housing space, so then the Mayor can lead on that work?
I suppose it would be, I guess, reactive to the questions that you may have as part of the particular item that you wanted to advocate on behalf of. I don't think we could do a sort of advocacy program as a sort of broad thing. It would need to be quite specific to what the advocacy was around. And I think, as always, we would always engage if there was ever any review of legislation going on. We would, fully engage in that process anyway.
Yeah, because sometimes there is benefit in doing that. Like, for example, in the child and youth strategy, just as an example, there's like an action there that council will advocate to lower the voting age to 16. So, yeah, I mean, that passed. That is the official position of council. Yeah, I think we're just looking for that kind of advocacy piece and understand what pieces of legislation do need to be changed, or amended, reviewed. Yeah.
It is worth pointing out that the Building Act was reviewed quite recently, and so I suppose it's a question of what the appetite would be for a further review, even with some advocacy. But certainly we would always support you guys in any work that you're doing.
Okay, so is that helpful for that amendment that you're thinking of?
Targeting thing is good. So, for example, with the Building Act, the accessibility requirements, not good enough. So, yeah, okay, cool.
Sweet. Councillor Matthews.
Yeah, interested in whatever you can tell me in a public forum about. There's some amendments floating around about the Johnsonville Library site, and anything about the work that's ongoing at that's on that site, or what the potential is, and whether how that would be affected by any amendment which took it out of the Housing Action Plan. And additionally, I'm interested, because I know that councillors who are interested in taking it out of this plan are interested in it for green space, and what my initial response would be, this is a terrible place for a park, and has any work been happened on, what has kind of led to, our kind of work on what should be used and done on that site?
So we've done some work on that site, both feasibility work on how it would look as a residential property. I've also been doing some work subsequent to that, looking at our deed of grant requirements as part of the housing upgrade programme. So as you'll know, we received funding from the Crown back in 2007, if I'm right, to upgrade certain social housing properties. This property, because it was a social housing set of flats, was also on that property, is captured in that deed of grant, and there is a requirement under that deed of grant. Well, there's two really. The first is to maintain social housing levels. So if we lose a unit, we have to retain a unit, or create a unit effectively. But probably the more important one is if we want to use it for a use outside of housing, there is a requirement to offer it back to the Crown so that they could continue to use it for housing. So that just makes it a little bit more complicated as to whether it could be used as a park or whether it couldn't, and I'm currently seeking some legal advice as to how that could work, or whether it's not possible and we would need to offer it back to what was Housing New Zealand and is now KO.
That's helpful context. Did you want to ask some questions around that?
Which sites, how was it decided which sites were covered by the deed, in terms, were the only sites that had housing on them when the deed was signed, or were there other sites?
A little bit before my time, to be fair, but as I understand it, I think it was ones that had social housing prior to the deed being signed, which accounts for, there's two sets of flats on this site, one at the front that would be captured by that, and one above the library which wouldn't be captured by that. So there's two separate blocks of flats on this site.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So just to be clear, the library site is not captured by that because...
It's all one title.
Okay.
Cool. Councillor Pennant?
Just following up on Johnsonville, and to be helpful, hopefully, look, there may be not support for Councillor Randall's amendment, but I think maybe there would be some sympathy for greening Johnsonville. So if not there, where is really the... And I'm just sorry, I was just trying to get up my minutes to remember what we'd agreed to as part of the spatial plan. Yeah, where are we at with that Johnsonville work?
So I guess the if not there where question is quite a hard one to be specific on. But I do think that there is probably agreement that maybe there is a greening need for Johnsonville, and I think that some of the work that you've done recently has kind of emphasised that. What I would say is that that piece of work probably doesn't sit within the housing action plan, because it's specifically about tangible actions that we're going to do to deliver on our housing strategy. And so whether that conversation needs to sit outside of the housing action plan but still be progressed.
Yeah, I think I provided some advice overnight that sort of indicated the Johnsonville growth plan would be a great opportunity to show where a new CBD, Johnsonville CBD green space could be located, of course requiring some work with Stride, the developers who own the building and own the surrounds, and to just earlier to that point around the use of the site for green space. There is a reasonable chance that we can proceed on the growth plan, identify more better located green spaces within Johnsonville, and go ahead and put in place mechanisms for us to acquire and build a town park, which I understand that both the Business Association and Tony Randall's particularly interested in. So, but that work will take 12 months. That's to coincide, of course, with the MRT growth plan. Around the Te Aro corridor, which of course both were priority growth areas for council when they adopted the draft district plan.
So I've just got the wording up again. So it was request officers review the provision of open and green space in Johnsonville as part of the review. You said you did that, and then a qualitative assessment has been completed and a communication stakeholder plan has been developed.
That's right.
I'm just wondering then, it would maybe be even in the action and tracking, we could just update that. I think people just want to see that progress is being made.
Yep.
That would
so
be the
PSA have done that work. Park Sports and Recreation will make sure they update that action track and ensure it's a bit clearer on what's next.
And I guess just the other question, without opening up a big ideological debate, hopefully, is that I hope that when we talk about housing, we are also thinking about the space around it, so that people do have a great quality of life. Yeah,
totally agree.
Okay.
I would point out specific to that side as well, and just to provide a bit more context, there is a massive substation and a right-of-way over that property as well, which would make it quite difficult to develop as a park. It would create a sort of physical challenge because there would be a substation right in the middle of it. But yeah.
Could be a heritage one. And just my other question. Well, that was a very nice one we saw today. The inspection service. First of all, a big congratulations to officers for coming. That's a big win. We'll talk about more tomorrow about getting MB.
The chair note that
was
Councillor Pennant said that was a big one.
Something
Thank
nice.
you.
Oh,
yeah. Oh no. Don't worry. I'm going to give you full praise tomorrow.
That's on YouTube forever.
Yeah. It is on YouTube forever. The officers have done an amazing job of coming up with a pilot program to look at inspecting rentals, which is what Renters United had asked for. So that's absolutely brilliant. I'm just asking a question about timeliness because I want to make sure it's resourced going forward. So if we don't have the results back from the pilot early enough, then we don't know if we need resources. The other thing too is that I do think that pilot needs to be designed quite tightly. Like, it's not about just putting a few posts on Facebook and go, if you've got a multi-rental, get in contact with us and we'll inspect. Like, it needs to have some parameters around it. It needs to have a really strong working relationship with Renters United and so on.
Yeah, so taken on board, and I know a number of councillors are very close to this issue, so we don't have any problem with liaising with you if you're interested to help us fashion what that could look like. Just to that second point around resourcing, I don't think we should discount the opportunity to shift resources under current overheads. So the operational needs of the business changes, and so does the business. So outside of the LTP or any other future annual plan, if there is a definite need for additional resources in this space, which the pilot will tell us yes or no, we'll make sure that's made available as soon as possible.
Okay, awesome. So I'm going to ask a question, then we'll go to Councillor Randall. So just on that MRT growth plan, kind of inspired by what was said at the Let's Get Welly Moving Urban Development Workshop. What do you think about the amendments around setting a public housing and affordable housing targets for the MRT growth plans?
I think, Madam Chair, it's probably premature at this stage. I think we need to do the growth plan, find out what the financial settings could look like. When we do this plan, we also work with the development industry to get a sense of their appetite for that type of standard. And so, in my mind, premature, but absolutely to be part of the plan and to be considered and adopted by council. It's just the percentage or type, in my mind, needs to be properly thought through.
Oh, yeah. So that's, I think, what we're asking, though. We're not setting a target now. We're just saying, can you go and do that?
Well, I think if the wording was a noting, yeah, it would be easier. I think if we were trying to report back on that, it would be a little bit too onerous and in a space we're not just clear on at the moment because we haven't commenced the work.
So where will the opportunities arise for us to set those kinds of things? Because I think the feedback was pretty clear that we need to be like, try and not control, but try and kind of like encourage the outcomes that we want from the MRT, and that is an outcome that we do want.
Yeah, so the urban development business case, which will be adopted by the council, everyone knows, of course, the city is responsible for urban planning. So when we adopt the business case, that business case will have a number of actions in it. One of them will be, let's set some housing targets for affordable and social housing. The others will be various things. How do we incentivise and enable development? What sort of open space are we planning for? What do we need to budget for? What are our DCs going to look like? What are they going to pay for? So there's a whole array of things that need to be fleshed out through the business case that will manifest, if you like, in the growth plan that you'll adopt.
Okay, cool. Councillor Randall.
Thank you. Given that the community, and I'm talking about the Johnsonville Business Group, the Johnsonville Community Association, and others have submitted, including through the Green Spaces plan, on the need for green space in this area and the fact that this is the only council-owned property in that area. And given that we've had discussions and meetings behind the scenes multiple times, why was this information around the impact of the deed on that site not told to councillors and the public?
I'm not sure we ever asked the question, councillor. The Green Space Plan, I don't have any PSR staff here that could answer that question, but has it been adopted yet? Wasn't quite. No, it's still being prepared, isn't it? So I'm sure that could be part of the information. We'll certainly let them know that we have it now. But the fact of the matter is, both before Paul and I started working at Wellington City Council, that site's been earmarked for housing.
Yeah, oh yes, I understand that, but I mean, there's one thing to say that it's earmarked for housing. It's another thing to say that it's actually legally bound to become housing. And so anyway, insofar as that you're getting some advice.
We're not. Just to be absolutely clear, we're not saying it's legally bound to be housing. We're getting advice to councillors on that.
So the question is, when will we have that advice? Because obviously the timing of getting that advice has an impact on this amendment.
Yeah, look, I don't know exactly when we will get the response to the question, but as soon as I know, I'll obviously get in touch and let you know. But what I would point out is the sort of physical aspects of the site as well, whether they are actually suitable for a park is a sort of question in my mind. The site.
Yeah, obviously, but obviously that's for the green space plan to work out.
Yeah, and for council to make a decision on. Yep.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions on the Housing Action Plan? Councillor O'Neill.
Kia ora. I was looking at the Māori housing section for this, and Hutt City Council have a very explicit partnership with iwi around upskilling and training people, but a more formal partnered relationship. And then I was wondering what's come through from the Takahere partners around Māori housing, and can we be stronger in that space?
Nathan will come up and answer that.
Kia ora. There isn't something that we can formally recognise right now. We still need to do that work with our Takahere partners to understand if any capability gaps are there, what does that look like for us, and how do we support them in their ventures for the future. So not just yet, but we do have, as all councillors know, we have regular meetings with all of our partners so we can figure it out in probably the next few weeks.
Cool. Second. My other partai was around, it says in the report that there's going to be kind of six-month reports on the Takahere partners' ambitions. Are we confident with the Housing Action Plan that we will be able to adopt any of the resolutions that come out of the group into this Housing Action Plan? Like, is this a live enough document to be able to incorporate when those decisions are made with Takahere into this plan, or will we need like another paper?
You know, like the Housing Action Plan is a live paper as well. It's reviewed every 6 months and reported back on every 6 months to you guys. So if there are additions or changes that can be incorporated, then definitely.
I think particularly within the Māori housing section as well, it is written in a way which makes it very responsive. This is new for us, particularly with Mataho Aranui and the way that we're interacting with our Takahere partners. So we need to do some more legwork before we understand what are those actionable items we can include in the action plan.
Sweet. Deputy Mayor Foon.
Kia ora. Just two questions, if that's okay. One is around co-housing and just wanting to understand, do officers have a view on what types of levers we can pull to help enable co-housing? And do we think a policy, what is the best way to go about that? Would it be a policy or a section in our housing plan? Really, it's about giving co-housing developers, for want of a better word, some clarity on what they can and can't expect from council and where we can help.
I think one of the biggest challenges of co-housing isn't so much sort of planning regulations and those sort of things. It's funding and then being able to fund the developments, because they need multiple partners to be able to have that funding available to come on board at the same time. So I don't think that a typical residential development is very similar to a co-housing development from a council perspective, and there would be nothing obstructive to a co-housing development. From a council perspective, it's definitely more on their funding side that's challenging.
I think Deputy Mayor, that the other point, we'll make that via a presentation that Mark will, from the City Compliance and Consenting team will give to Council, is that, we have put some resources into the development facilitation and housing facilitation space recently, and we're taking a different approach to residential development that the probably City hasn't seen before in terms of how it tries to enable as much housing as possible. So there's this compliance side that Paul's talking about, the component that relates to co-housing. As Paul said, we don't differentiate between design standards, whether co-housing's right or wrong in this place, or whether single title dwellings are appropriate as well. We just differentiate on, is it good for the people living there, and does it provide the services and facilities that they'll need to have a prosperous ton of time living in that asset, I suppose. It does seem to be an economic question around funding and the banking institutions about realising this as a legitimate form of housing. There are conversations around the development contribution policy funding levers you could pull there, and also rating policy levers. They're all before you. The rating policy is being reviewed as part of the LTP, so there's something to keep an eye on from a councillor point of view, and the types of mechanisms that could be provided to those types of developments.
Yeah, I guess the question is why are we seeing a boom in Melbourne and yet we can't get our co-housing programs off the ground?
Well, I think that's a question for someone who's a little bit more.
Maybe we need to do a little bit of research on Melbourne. If you want me to head off, I'm happy to go.
My only comment would be it's very dangerous to compare, the New Zealand and Wellington construction development market to the Victorian one, and you've got different banks, and you've got broader array of credit. You've got probably a much better materials and labour cost situation over there as well. You know, the old adage, a nail comes over the Tasman and it goes up in price 20%. That's been around for 20, 30 years now. So very, very difficult to compare it. But as Paul said, we are looking at Melbourne and we're looking at Sydney as well. And I think Northern Territories has got some really interesting co-housing ideas too. So, that'll be advice we'll provide back to council in due course.
When's due course, sorry?
When's the review of the Housing Action Plan? December, yeah.
In December. Okay. So another partai. Just have we considered looking at another organisational structure for our Te Kaianga project specifically, i.e. like a CCO or, is there another way so we can access the LGFA that we could do?
Yeah, definitely. We're looking at those as options. I think one of the real strengths of the TK programme, although is using Wellington City Council as the word is tenant covenant, but basically from a developer's point of view, partnering with Wellington City Council is about as strong of a partner as they're ever going to get. And so from a bankable point of view, it's extremely attractive to them. The advice that we've had is that that could be diminished slightly if it was in a separate organisation. That said, it's definitely something that we're looking into, and that there would probably be benefits to it in terms of, being able to move quicker and more commercially and those sort of things. But yeah, it's definitely on the work plan, and it's in the action plan actually as well as a point to follow up on.
And have we got a date when we'll kind of land on something for that?
Well, the research that we're doing is incorporated in this action plan, and let me just see, the date is mid-2020, but basically 12 months, the end of 2024. It's also incorporated in the work streams that we've got for the Te Kaianga programme. So yeah, it's kind of in both work streams over the next 12 months.
Great, thank you.
Yes, sorry I was a bit late, so you may have missed this. What work is proposed to be done to the Johnsonville site, in quotes, to remove the development barriers to increase the attractiveness of the future development, and what is the cost of that?
Yeah, so far the first step that we've taken is to we employed the property group to take a look from a Public Works Act point of view as to whether there were any requirements to offer the property back to previous owners, and so that work has just been completed under, I think it's Section 40 of the Public Works Act, and so there was no requirement to offer that back. The next step will be understanding this requirement under the deed and whether there's an offer back requirement to Kaianga Ora. There's also an easement on the site that hasn't been formalised. From a sort of legal perspective, it seems to be a hangover of years gone by, and so we're now looking at what the process would be to formalise that easement. It allows access to a property to the rear. So that's where we're at the moment. Also, just undertaking some feasibility work on the site to see what a suitable development, what's a suitable sort of scale of development might be on that property. But yeah, that's where we're up to at the moment.
Okay. Given assuming it's under the deed, we've got to offer it to Kaianga Ora. Why are we spending anything on the site when we're obliged to have a single person to offer it?
The requirement for the offer back under the deed is only if we dispose of the site or use it for something that isn't housing. So if we disposed of the site, we would have to do that. But if we chose to develop it ourselves or in partnership with somebody, say for a TK property or something else, well then it would still be within the housing space and there would be no requirement to offer it to KO.
Okay. What impact would happen with not proceeding with this work? Like just not doing it for a year? Because we're talking about over the next 6 months or so. So we didn't do it in the next 6 months. What's the impact?
I mean, it just puts us on the back foot for if we do want to do some development on that side, or if an opportunity arises to bring in additional affordable housing to Johnsonville. Not doing that work would give us a delay of 6-12 months, depending on how long we didn't do anything.
Okay, and lastly, just to flag, I have to ask a question under public excluded.
Oh, that's not in this session. This is just for the housing paper.
I know,
you
but
could
I have to
definitely
ask a
catch up.
question that's actually associated with a public excluded matter related
Don't
to
ask
this.
it in here.
I
Wait
know.
until afterwards, and then go and have a chat with them.
Okay, thanks.
Is there any other questions? Councillor Calvert.
Yeah, I'd just like to follow on from that, because given that Johnsonville has been a designated area for more housing since 2013, and we're only just now getting around to our whole infrastructure planning aspect, I can't see why leaving it for another year, the small site, would make any difference, and perhaps would be a useful bargaining tool for the likes of development with Stride and perhaps some other landowners exactly around that area.
So I suppose it would be helpful to understand what you mean by leaving it for another year. You mean just don't do any work on the site, or don't do any?
Well, alternatively, a bit like what we did in Karori, albeit it's just a gravel pit, is the old St John's Church, which is still, we're waiting for something to happen there. But yeah, just wondering whether, I mean, if it's not an earthquake prone, if it doesn't need to come down, a bit like our cab or mob, can it just stay there until we understand a bigger picture? Because we've got to start putting pressure on Stride, and and also working with some of the other landowners around that space.
Well, it is earthquake prone. That's one.
Does it have to come down? Or?
It has a timeline. I think it might be 2027. It has to come
Okay,
down
so
by.
we've got some time.
Yeah. Yeah, we do have some time, and I guess there's sort of broader conversations with Stride, as you mentioned, that probably need
Yeah,
to
well,
occur.
I mean, I think we just got to look at what levers we can use. I just wonder whether that's a possible, so it's really a case of, can we leverage some of our levers like this? And given we're 10 years on from announcing a framework for Johnsonville, can we just not wait until and use that as a lever for making sure we have got a good framework in place to take us forward?
So would it be possible for you to clarify just how that could be used as a lever? Maybe I'm not quite following.
Well, it could be a key part of a site. Just I don't know, but I mean, I don't have all the information in front of me, but I think we don't know enough about that whole area as yet, and we do know that the community is calling for a community space or green space, an outdoor space, and it's our one piece of land that we do own.
Yeah, look, Madam Chair, at the end of the day, Councillor, if Council resolved to
Yeah, it's up to
Okay.
us.
price this site, that we'll down tools on it. That's pretty straightforward at the moment. I think what you're saying is that it's as a lever. What you're saying is that it's an asset we could potentially use as leverage for Johnsonville to redevelop. And that point's taken. There's all sorts of creative ideas, going around on vacant sites. But for the purpose of councillors instructing officers to do a job at the moment, it's a housing site. Until we're told otherwise, it's not. So.
Yeah, and which is what we're deciding tomorrow.
So Deputy Mayor Phone.
Just have we got an update? Sorry, I did put these questions in the Q&A, so I hope, but it's,
I haven't had a chance to get to them, sorry.
well, maybe if you you can answer them now and then you don't have to do them. Yeah.
Save me some
The stock take of housing that was to be sold, I think council decided it mid last year. How have we gone with making sure those properties are sold and back into the market?
We've brought a substitute who can answer that question.
Right, yeah. So just a bit of a stock take. Have we done 80% of it, 100%?
Sure. Kia ora, Deputy Mayor Foon and councillors. You'll be aware of the Strategic Housing Investment Program, the SHIP that councillors voted on. 2020 tranches 2 and 3 were approved. You'll get this in the Q&A and also a copy of the paper. Excuse me, 9 of the properties have been sold. A further 11 are under commercially sensitive negotiations with iwi. It is our intention to bring a paper back to council by December regarding future decisions on the entire program. You'll all appreciate the housing market has shifted. The pressures on housing have shifted, and obviously the housing market has shifted. So again, we'll come back to you in December with advice on where we see the ship heading, so to speak. Thanks, Laurie.
Cool. Councillor Randall.
Yes, I just wanted to follow up on Councillor Calvert's comment, which is just triggered something for me. So, you're saying what would the reason be? I mean, of course, the reason
Going to
is...
ask a question, or are you going to
Yes,
make
I'm
a
going to
comment?
ask a question. So the reason be, of course, we'd have more time to have an integrated plan. And for example, if a good size neighbouring property became available next to that site, then that would totally change the dynamics of what would be possible with that site and both the sites together. And so, obviously having an integrated, understand before Stride was part of a package, and this was part of the package. And so, going ahead with this stuff without having that wider plan, would that not be a valid reason for perhaps postponing until we've actually got the wider plan for Johnsonville actually more established before we make decisions around proceeding with stuff with a specific site?
That's a decision that we can make tomorrow. That we can make that decision. I don't think it's worth.
And look, totally agree from that perspective. Yeah, like I've no disagreement there. I think there's just a sort of tension, isn't there, between making sure that Johnsonville has a provision of affordable housing at the same time, and I guess that's the only thing that we're trying to balance. But totally take the point.
Okay, cool. That looks like that's all of our questions. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today and answering all those questions really well. We look forward to the debate tomorrow. Kia ora.